Hello and welcome, everybody. Really happy to be talking today to my dear friend, Daneen Akers, about the divine feminine and her new book on Mama God. So, Daneen is a writer, she's a documentary film producer, and a mom. And she got her start in this publishing world of really cool indie publishing by writing Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which is an illustrated children's book with original portraits and profiles of people of diverse faiths who work for love and justice in their various corners of the world, even when that work rocks various religious boats. And her upcoming picture book, Dear Mama God, is a simple child's prayer of wonder and gratitude addressed to the divine in, shockingly for many of us who grew up in patriarchal religion, feminine form. So Daneen has taught English and language arts at various grade levels, and she co-produced and directed several independent documentary films in collaboration with the San Francisco Film Society. One of them, called Seventh Gay Adventists, screened at the Wild Goose Festival several years ago, which is how she eventually came to live near Asheville, North Carolina, and is a part of the story of how I got to know Daneen. She's very fond of books, of fireplaces, of walks in the woods, which we have plenty of around here, snuggles with her daughters, and large pots of tea or coffee enjoyed with friends. Most mornings, she's woke up by an enthusiastic Carolina wren outside her window in the very picturesque place where she lives. Daneen, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It is absolutely an honor to chat with you today.
Yeah, totally. And, we're talking because there's this whole idea that has been sadly lost to us in our contemporary spirituality, and yet is kind of a birthright of humanity. And so I want to ask you, why is it important to speak, to think, to write, and to relate to God as a mother and as a she?
Yeah, exactly as you say, this is not new. It's all the way back. um, but for any of us who grew up in, contemporary, especially Western forms of Christianity that are completely tied to forms of empire, that turns out to also be tied to many other challenging things like racism and capitalism and other sorts of dominant systems that aren't working for us. But a huge part of that is patriarchy. And so, you know, I grew up with some lip service to every person is created in the image of God, and yet every single metaphor, every single pronoun, songs, liturgy, doctrines, my heritage denomination still does not ordain women, was completely infused with a masculine only God view. The language was masculine, everything about it was masculine. And so I internalized that the masculine was the better, the superior, the stronger option. And the first time that I encountered God as she, it was actually in a song. I was in my 30s, and just one verse of a song had been modified by the worship leader because of something like it related to a topic that we were talking about. It was a song that I bet you may have grown up hearing too. It's called I Have a Maker. I Have a Maker. And it was in the song, She Knows My Heart. Even before time began, my life was in her hands. And I just wept.
Hmm.
I sat in the pew just sobbing because, I can still feel it in my body. It was just this profound sense of realizing that I had never actually felt my female body. And I think this is true for anybody who isn't sort of typically male body conforming in our cultural standards, had not felt included
Hmm.
in that divine image and in that concept. And it really started to shift in me the power and the beauty of making sure that our language itself, our visual images start to include the diversity of humanity. And part of that is explicitly feminine pronouns, even though, I think any transcendent divine, any ultimate reality is vastly broader than any of these concepts. I think we actually have to, we need some equity for the divine feminine for, a few thousand years maybe of consciously putting the feminine there. And it was awkward. Oh my goodness. I just felt so weird for a while because you realize how much you've internalized the patriarchal ideas that God is she is somehow like that just seems odd and weird and like and we've associated a lot of it with sexuality and it like there's this whole bit you realize you've absorbed. But I gradually started using it with my youngest daughter, and I would whisper actually in her ear she during songs and things like that as we went along. And it's been beautiful to see her develop this concept of a broader God. And then she started to teach her little sister, who is 7 years younger than her, to pray to Mother God, like just on her own. And then gradually my littlest turned that into Mama God. And she started praying these prayers to Mama God that were just simple, beautiful, full of delight at the world, and just little quirky things that kids will be grateful for. Like one of them is grateful for hula hoops because dogs can jump through them, which is a total like 5-year-old language thing, which she probably was at the time. So I started to collect them because I realized that we like books are an easy way to introduce complex concepts just to our daily routine. And that powerful shift is really important until I think we're really leaving out a part of the divine mystery if we don't like explicitly include femininity and femaleness in our God concepts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm so curious, a lot of folks tuning in, probably like us, have children, or maybe they have grandchildren or other kids in their lives. How long did it take you from that moment sitting in the pew and hearing that worship song rewritten to where you really became comfortable with it? You described the process of how it began to impact your kids' lives, but how long did it take for that to like really marinate? Was there a gap between the cognitive
Oh yeah.
like, oh, this might be okay to do, and then like the fluency of going there?
Yeah, like years.
Mm.
It was really, really awkward for a while. I sort of had to consciously make myself do it. For a while, I did Mother, Father, God was my bridge. And of course, I would then use, creator of all, sustainer, things like that, those concepts that are beautiful. However, what I realized is they still land as male in our bodies if our concepts have always been male. So if we've always thought of God as, and I think it's so instinctual in Western culture, even if you don't want it,
Mhm.
Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel God is like the first thing that comes, unless you like consciously really work to bring in other imagery and ideas. So even those gender neutral titles land male. Honestly, they generally, for someone like me, land white male, because that's what our culture has imbued for so long. So it just takes time. And I do remember my eldest daughter, she made this beautiful painting when she was 8 called
Oh,
Mama God Holding the Universe.
mm, that is beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And I sometime around that age that she asked me why I only prayed to God as a mama or as a mother at home in private. So
Mm.
she sort of challenged me to start integrating this more publicly. And I was scared to death because I knew my family systems, the heritage denomination systems. I just knew how much harder it was going to be to say she or mother than it would to just say a generic God. Like it would just be different. And so I think she was about 5 when I actually had it was like a New Year's visioning board thing that I did with a friend. And I actually set an intention to start integrating Mother God language in my public life too. And so it's been this process, and now I'm comfortable with it. And I've seen the life-giving beauty of it for especially my youngest one, because just on timing of like we had already transitioned at home when she was born. We were going to a church, first in San Diego and then in Asheville, that used either gender neutral or explicitly feminine God language and imagery. And then because of the pandemic, we didn't go anywhere for quite a period of time, like 2 years. So she wasn't around like family gatherings or things where she might have heard, male God language. So she just turned 7 and she genuinely has no idea yet Like she still doesn't really read all that much. So I still can censor, or she doesn't really notice billboards yet or anything. And so she doesn't know that this is a unique, somewhat rare perspective. And even just last night, she said something to me about she was glad she was a girl because girls are like Mama God and can create life.
How beautiful.
Yeah, and it does make total logical sense to her. If there's a creator of all, actually it's a mama.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's wild because, while it's a whole other conversation to see how our scripture may have been shaped in certain ways that, maybe favor masculine language for God, it's not as though even in the form of scripture that we have today, that the feminine is absent from the Bible.
Right.
We've
Yes, absolutely. I compiled a list for an essay that I wrote a while ago that I could link to you. And I know you have some essays on this too, actually, or your talk. I know you did a talk at a church. But yeah, God is she, and the Spirit of God, and Sophia Wisdom, and the grammar itself is there. And then we have all these metaphors of God as a mother hen, as a nursing mother, nourishing her children. Like we have it all there, actually. Like I'm not somebody who now has to have that like proof in the text for something that's life-giving. And yet I think it's wonderful for those who need that, or it was super important for me in my early transition to recognize like this is biblical. It's just been repressed or overlooked, sometimes unintentionally, and a lot of times intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
The book actually opens with Reverend Will Gaffney's translation of Job 33:4. And this was another, like, I wept when I read it. So part of her work is restoring the feminine grammar to the text. So this is her Job 33:4, which we were able to license for the book. The Spirit of God, she has made me, and the breath of the nursing God, she gives me life. And that was just another, like, what if kids of all genders grew up hearing that kind of God language?
Yeah, absolutely. And so while I think I already, know the answer to this question because of the trajectory of what you're sharing here, where did the idea for this book, Dear Mama God, come from?
It was definitely hearing my children pray together. And it started with, the older one who was in on this. She was old enough to understand that this is a little bit radical in our culture. But yeah, she just one day started teaching her little sister to pray to Mother God. And she was so little at the time that I remember it sounded like, Dear Mother Dodd. And then just gradually over time, she made it Dear Mama God. And it was these lovely little phrases, like, Dear Mama God, thank you for the earth and all living things, which is now this incredible artist who did the cover art for Holy Troublemakers, and Rachel Held Evans' portrait, and Mary Oliver's and Alice Paul. So she's the artist that did this cover, and several of the gorgeous artwork in here. She's the one. Here's Mary Oliver.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know your people know Rachel really well, and also Rachel of blessed memory now. Let's see, here we go. She also did this portrait of Rachel that really, so Jillian, she's a complete genius, did the artwork, and it really brought this like luminous feeling. But yeah, these little prayers, thank you for rain that makes rainbows. I love, and then thank you for paper that I can draw on. Like, that's not something I ever have thought to say a prayer of thanks for, but kids do. Thank you for, this is one of my favorites. Thank you for beating hearts that love.
Oh, wow.
So it's just in this kid language, and I just would jot it down because I didn't want to forget it. And I eventually one day, and it was probably in connection with Reverend Gaffney's quote, translation of Job, and a few of those things, where I thought, you know what, this would be a beautiful children's book. It's super simple. I feel like it lands more like music. Like, there's very little text. It's a feeling, and it's that sense of stepping into the wonder and awe and that sort of nourishing concept. And really the only thing that's radical about it is the title, because it's just a children's prayer book, but it's addressed to God as a mama.
Yeah. Yeah, a book of gratitude that's wrapped in the divine feminine, that comes from the very rhythms of your life as you've rebuilt your faith, and as you've
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly been part of that spiritual composting. I know you like that word. Or faith shifting is figuring my way back to how to share faith and God concepts that really align now. Yeah. So the bookshelves are thin. There are a few actually. And in fact, this is a gorgeous one that came out last year. That if anybody's looking for one like this Christmas season, it's absolutely incredible artwork. That is full. All the references are the actual biblical images to God as a mother bear, the mama hen. Sorry, I have to go opposite direction of what it seems on these. So it just starts with, God the Father, but God is your mother too. You are made in her image. She is making all things new. So Reverend Teresa Kim Pechanovsky and Koa Lee's gorgeous illustrations. So this is another companion for the journey.
Absolutely.
And then of course, Rachel's book that Matthew Paul Turner finished, What is God Like, includes all pronouns, which is lovely. I got to highlight a few of these because they're beautiful. And back to the old Rabbi Sasso, What is God's Name? This is kind of a classic. Rabbi Sasso is one of the first people I remember listening to on Krista Tippett back when it was Speaking of Faith, and now it's on Being. But and there was a episode, I mean, this has been 15 years ago, 20 maybe, about the spirituality of children. And what really resonated with me is they are deeply spiritual by nature. Like the world is this awesome, wondrous place. And in some ways we just need to not get in the way of it and layer it with too much stuff. So, I mean, in some ways, I think listening to my youngest daughter pray to Mama God brought back that gratitude and wonder and awe for, yes, there's difficult things and there's a lot in this world that needs our work, but it's beautiful and it is our very breath. In this book, we've made Mama God a tree, a glorious, wondrous tree. And I hadn't even thought of the symbolism immediately. The artist and I talked for about 2 years trying to think about the art on this. But the very breath that trees give off is the breath that sustains us. Like it is a deep connection. And I think the way a lot of us encounter the divine and that sense of transcendence is in the natural world.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like a reciprocal feeding of us and the trees breathing together. And of course, to go back to that, biblical imagery, I believe it's Proverbs that compares wisdom to a tree of life, Sophia to a tree of life. And so you have this nurturing abundance once again, in the divine feminine in our tradition.
Yeah, I went last week to about 2 hours away from here is a grove of trees called Joyce Kilmer Memorial Grove. Joyce Kilmer wrote a poem about trees that is often one of those memorized in high school English class kind of thing. About I think I shall never see a poem as beautiful as a tree or something. But these trees are truly old growth. There's very, very little of that on the East Coast because colonizing settlers took it all. It's just this happenstance events that this grove has not been cut. And so there's some trees there, especially these old tulip poplars that are 500-600 years old. They're incredible. And being in their presence is just this sense of it's going to be okay. There has been this symphony going on for a long time before me and will be after me. And, I am here for this moment and connecting to this source. So that's why we decided not to go with an anthropomorphic Mama God and keep it in the natural world.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like the practical impact of praying to Mama God, of conceiving of God as mother has been, what I'm hearing so far is gratitude, especially as you've heard it in the lives of your kids.
Yes.
Things that they're grateful for, and then Yeah, that sense of imminent beauty in
Yes.
the world.
Yep. Gratitude and beauty. There's a luminosity that comes, I think, with this. There's also a lack of I, I've been with a few people, women and men and non-binary, who we've been in circles together where we've tried on the concept of feminine God language, and for many it was just completely foreign, of course. And one of the things that was really significant for a lot of people was the sudden lack of judgment when they suddenly conceptualized the divine as a great mother.
Mm.
Like it's, and that's not to say that there aren't people who have mother wounds, and that there aren't nourishing fathers. However, because of just the way that we have shaped really unhealthy gender concepts, we've equated everything feminine with female and everything masculine with male, even though we all have both. But our culture, and especially our technology obsessed, capitalistic society right now, really favors the like assertively aggressive, hustle and competitive, I'm going to crush it kind of unhealthy ideas of like a masculine that is not an integrated,
Mm-hmm.
not an integrated whole. So that's one reason why I think it helps to actually use mother and not just parent, for many people, because we actually need to re-nurture these concepts of mothering as a gender full concept. These are not any gender in particular, but we need to kind of name mother and mothering as divine, as these life-giving things that they are. And stepping into that space, I think, really helps us just relax, because anybody who has parented or has just been close to a child that you want to help nourish and see them flourish, you are not holding them in judgment. You have this complete sense of like nurturing and this unconditional love that, I think has been pretty missing from patriarchal religious concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying reminds me of my friend Alexander John Shia, who is a Jungian analyst by background, and
Mm.
a spiritual teacher who comes from the Christian tradition, but speaks to a variety of people and archetypes, and he talks about how in Jungian thought too, there's a lot to do with what's traditionally referred to as masculine and feminine archetypes. And he's really done a lot of beautiful work to even restore the Jungian language of
Mm.
anima and animus, and how
Yeah.
we have the capacity for all of these within ourselves. We might gravitate towards one kind of expression or another, but it sounds like what you're saying too is that Dear Mama God could be useful for folks of all genders to tap into the sense of mothering and gratitude and non-judgmentalness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So who do you see this book as being for?
One of the things that's been fun about writing children's books like Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints and now Dear Mama God is what I've realized is, while they're aimed at children, their adults come along. And especially when we're talking picture book age, most of these kids don't read. So they are like this book is being shared with the adults in their lives. And so it's almost I didn't really intend it, but it's a kind of a clever way to speak like a healthier theology, I think, to adults while really talking to their kids, but they're listening in or they're reading. So I do think that anybody who is a parent or clergy of some sort or clergy adjacent teachers, these are people who I think directly understand how amazing picture books are, and they really do land in our soul, I think, in a way. And I'm an English major. uh, uh, I have my master's in English composition, and so I'm a big fan of words. And I have really become in awe of art through the process of producing children's books, because art just lands in our soul differently, and it lives there, and it's sort of nourishment. I think it's like poetry, or it kind of we were not literate for many millennia as humans than we were. And I think we've somewhat lost something with such a reliance on text only. And so going back to picture books has been a beautiful experience for me, for just remembering the power of the symbol. It is the language of the soul. And so I think anybody who wants that kind of powerful symbolism to help heal patriarchal wounds, especially if you grew up in a religion, especially if you grew up in patriarchal religious systems, I think this book is for them. And then, obviously it's directly for children too.
Yeah. I'm with you. I also am a fan of reading and books, as you
Mm-hmm.
see behind me. But I recognize that, yeah, some of the most moving books that have made the most impact on the most people are either and or like storytelling. So I think
Mm-hmm.
of like Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, or
Mm-hmm.
Paul Young's novel The Shack, which is another
Mm-hmm.
divine feminine.
I've heard lots of people tell me that book was the first time they encountered the concept of God as anything other than masculine terms, and it was really moving for them. And I know you were heavily involved in helping that book reach more people.
Yeah, it was really a blast. It's like, to me, it's the only bestseller in the last 100 years in the evangelical adjacent world that I think the paper it's printed on. But so storytelling is one thing that speaks directly to the heart, and like you're saying, art and pictures and that sort of primal symbolism
Yeah.
is so meaningful. And so
I've been surrounding myself, by the way, now with divine feminine artwork.
Mm.
This is one. This is supposed to be Sophia with a dove. Birds were frequently associated in ancient Near East spirituality with the feminine, and so it really reshapes a lot of stories, like Jesus getting baptized and the Spirit coming down in a dove. Things like this, where you realize, like, oh, to early listeners, that's a feminine image.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about who have been some formative artists and authors that you've been, really resonating with as you've been looking at God as mother and God as she.
Yes. Oh my goodness. When I first heard that she back in that first song, probably 15 or more years ago now, I'm a reader. So I started looking for resources, and I have a little stack here. These are just some of them that have been really meaningful. So not to knock them off. The first one for me was Sue Monk Kidd's Dance of the Dissident Daughter. This was just one of those, mind expanding, shattering books for me, partly because, she grew up Southern Baptist, which I did not grow up, but the culture I grew up in wasn't all that different. And yeah, just her recognizing patriarchy in our society because of her daughter. She saw, some men really objectifying her 13, 14-year-old daughter. And then she had this awakening to, wow, I'm steeped in a church. Like, she was like she was like a Beth Moore at the time. Like, she was leading women's prayer conferences and all this stuff. She was an acceptable female voice in the Southern Baptist world. And then she just started having these awakenings and researching, and just had this profound shift and started speaking out about it, which became unacceptable. So she really lost everything. And so what I love is all of her successful novels that we know now, like The Secret Life of Bees and all those, happened after her spiritual awakening to the divine feminine. So yeah, this was a super important book. I mean, it's 25, 30 years old now. But it was really one of my first encounters. And she's really the one who helped me articulate like why you just can't go to gender neutral. Like, she said she would start talking about this with clergy, and they would say, like, can't we just use God? Like, let's not be explicitly feminine. Let's just say God. And she says, the word God does not register with us as neuter. Technically, it may not imply any particular gender, but what registers and functions in the mind is male. And I've just experienced that as truth, that you actually have to consciously, explicitly include the feminine, because, we have thousands of years of all liturgy, art, and doctrine telling us God equals male. So super, super important also in this list is Reverend Gaffney. So she's actually written more books than this, but Womanist Midrash was one of my first encounters with her. And then she is just writing, I think she's on the second or third year of a woman's lectionary for the whole church, which is just a phenomenal. Anybody who is, following the liturgical calendar or adjacent to that somehow, her commentary and readings, and it's it's not just the feminine language for God. It's also things like how we have racialized light and dark, and making sure we're not just being sloppy with that kind of imagery, which really actually at Advent starts to super be used. So that's like another little caution, I would say, especially for those who are, preparing various types of Advent services, is this is a phenomenal resource for just making sure we're not unintentionally, using language that maybe in its original had no racial connotation, but because of our history, especially in the United States, has absolutely taken that on. So reading her is, you just understand you're reading one of the prophets in our time today. So her books, I super recommend. And then there's a couple of classics, like She Who Is and In Memory of Her by, super respected feminist scholars and professors. This one of the things that people first usually come back with is, didn't Jesus pray to God as Father? And of course there's like all these little tabs are like where where she addresses that. So I usually say like, this has been addressed, and like briefly, one of the things I'll say is, like, of course this is all metaphor, right? That's all we get. We only get metaphor, and we've just been stuck on God metaphor as masculine, male, father only for a long time now, and that's harmful. It's harmful because it allows us to treat girls, women, and non-binary people, and anybody who's not like traditionally male conforming, as less than. And then it's also harmful because it just doesn't allow the divine mystery its full potential. And one of the things she says is Jesus's use of Abba, which actually, I was just seeing Reverend Teresa talking to somebody about this, can also mean like womb, like source. Like it's not necessarily sort of the father, Papa that we've come, but that's a metaphor that works for Jesus. It didn't mean it was the only thing. And what's interesting is how we've kind of kept Jesus as only male, but we haven't kept his socioeconomic status. There's a lot of things we have not kept as literal the way that we have kept that. And that says more about the way that the traditions of the church came about. She also talks about, in that culture, the father was the provider. Like it was kind of a political term too. It was who is going to make sure everyone is cared for, who is providing in that way. And that also, so in the earliest gospel, so like in Mark, it's only used 4 times by Jesus. Now, when you get to John, which is a full, like at least a generation or two later, then it's used like 100 times. So it says a little bit more about the progression of the tradition of the early church and who was starting to get political power than it does maybe about Jesus's own language and metaphor, which of course we're getting through translations and translators too. But it's one of those things that, I just, for people for whom father is a really beautiful metaphor and life-giving, then I'm like, please be blessed with it. But don't require that to be the only available metaphor, and we have all these other parts of scripture that beautifully use mothering images and feminine God language that, we have just really ignored or repressed.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's so cool that you've dug into all of these vital resources, and like you said, you're translating this to the language of art and symbol, and something that we can really live and breathe into. And so, can you tell us a little bit about how folks can get Dear Mama God, and how can we support you right now as you're bringing it to publication?
Yes, thank you. So we have a Kickstarter running right now as we're a nonprofit small publisher of books and films that really just help provide resources for spiritually unconventional. I never know quite the term to use. Nobody nobody in these categories agrees on the right terminology. So in generally the more expansive broader concepts of God. And so we're running a Kickstarter. I can definitely give you the link, but an easy link is Dear Mama God /Kickstarter. And you can support the project there. It's almost 50% funded in the first week, which is remarkable, especially given that it's been a holiday week. But I do think the art, I was just gonna find you another one, is one of those things that when people see it, it's just, how can you not want some of this to come? This is the thank you for trees, for birds to build nests in.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, it's stunning.
and then the book will be published in April, assuming things continue to work with the Kickstarter. And this has been our way. That's how we brought Holy Troublemakers to life too. It's basically a way to get people on board early to help raise the capital for the press costs, which are significant. But I really, really believe in beautiful books and what they do, because they kind of live in our home.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of things that we make space for in our life. Like, look behind you. We make space for beautiful books, or meaningful books. And so I think these are the kind of things that people will continue to I hope they start with their kids, work with their grandkids, pass them on to godchildren, I hope they circulate about, because I do think it's a beautiful concept and a way to just step into a new way of thinking about the divine. I think it's very heart opening.
Absolutely. And, I love how you bring books and art to publication. I've been behind the scenes in the process, especially with the previous campaign. You're really concerned about ethical sourcing and supply chains and, just everything up and down the line. So, folks, if you're tuning in and Dear Mama God resonates with you, really encourage you to visit the Kickstarter. The links are in the notes here. And go ahead and support this now, and, reserve as many copies as you think you would want for yourself, for your family, for your loved ones, because this kind of publishing is still sadly not mainstream, and it takes a lot on a kind of grassroots level to bring books like this to public.
Yeah, mainstream publishers tend to not do anything about faith when it comes to children's books, because they don't really know what to do. It's like a landmine for them, and they just don't engage. And then the vast majority of books that have anything to do with faith out there are really, really conservative, fundy leaning. There's a few out there, like Beaming Books is doing a lot of really beautiful books. And there's getting to be, I think there is a growing understanding that we need these types of faith books too. But sadly, there's still very few and far between. But it's getting better, and I appreciate your help supporting projects like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to continue to let everyone know in the sort of marketplace of ideas that this is really vital ways of storytelling that are resonating with more and more people. So thank you so much, Daneen, for your time here today, sharing
Thank you, Mike.
of how the divine feminine has impacted you, and how you're paying it forward by just, sharing this beautiful, gratitude drenched and love drenched story with all of us.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all that you are putting out in the world. It's one of those things that makes me feel not lonely in my spiritual journey.
Thank you.